When ist das Mundstück Gitt und Slaughtermeyer? Ja, wer Hund des Oder, die Flipperwald Disput. Hi there. I just found an interview given by the Game of Thrones staff linguist David J. Peterson, creator of Dothraki and Valyrian, in which, for the first time, an official source like him was describing what the Long Night prequel was like, Blood Moon. And the way he described it made me start wondering if there might have been some truth to that speculation that maybe Naomi Watts was playing a gender-swapped Lan the Clever. I'll explain that this was a few weeks ago. I'm surprised no one reported on it. That's why I didn't find it. That he gave this interview with the Game of Owns podcast back in November, right after the Long Night pilot got canceled. And when I saw it on their YouTube channel anyway, there were only 55 views on it. I guess their podcast obviously must have more people listening to it, but no news sites were covering this, and he was actually saying some insider stuff about the prequels we'd never heard. Now, during the interview, he does explain that while he is an insider, he is on the bottom of the totem pole. He is D-list. He says, I found out Long Night was canceled by reading it in the news, same as you guys, that I'm the linguist. They don't tell me stuff up to the moment like that. Like, he said, I'm behind the caterers. The caterers have to know when they're filming so they can go and get everyone food. I'm the linguist. They don't tell me anything. So he made it a big point to say he never saw a full script of the whole thing, much less saw the finished pilot. That they're trying to, because of their whole emphasis on secrecy, they gave him the specific lines he had to translate into other languages, and just enough context to make them intelligible, because what they were saying was actually fairly generic. So right at the top, he says, I don't know that much about what the story was like. So if you think, I'm trying to hype this up as a big revelation, anything else we've heard before this was unconfirmed rumor. He didn't tell us much, but what he told us is the first time we've gotten any confirmation on what the hell is the story you're telling in this, where Martin never set any prequel novella or anything. That he didn't want to make a story in The Long Night. Well, the way he explained it was everyone in Westeros at this point in time are the First Men. This is before the Andals came. Let me pull up his exact quote. He said, and he might have been being generic, because again, he actually didn't know the story, maybe these were his assumptions, but he said, it's set before the Andal invasion. The Andals aren't in Westeros yet. So the First Men and the Children of the Forest are already getting on well together. This is by the time the wars between them have ended. This is after the Pact. And then the Andals come over, and that's the beginning of the series. Now, again, because he doesn't know the story that well, maybe it's a few Andals come over, because if you've read The World of Ice and Fire, the Andal invasions happened a full 2,000 years after the Long Night. So the question is, were they trying to just cram these two storylines together? Because we have other things in interviews where, like Martin and other people going, well, maybe it's set closer to 5,000 years ago. And yes, in the books, they do emphasize this is legend. No one really knows if the Long Night was 8,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, or 6,000 years ago. They're guesses, but the figure people generally use is 8,000. Or at the very least, that it was a distinct historical era from the Andal invasions. That these were centuries apart. Whenever they happened, if they happened only 4,000 years ago, you would expect the Long Night to be 1,000 years before the Andal invasion. Whatever, that these weren't the same thing. So I'm worried, does this necessarily mean that they were just cramming the two storylines together? Possibly, and it might have been so bad that's why they canceled it, among other reasons. But again, to stress, that's what he assumed, that there are Andals in it doesn't necessarily mean it's the Andal invasion, right? That could be a couple of things. So he didn't know the full story, whatever's going on with that. So the First Men, who are all the only human ethnicity in Westeros at the time, you got the Starks, the Casterlys, they speak what is now called the Old Tongue, which in the present day of A Song of Ice and Fire is only known by some of the wildlings beyond the wall, not even all of them speak it anymore, and in a few place names, like the giants use Old Tongue, so like Magmar Tundoweg and One the Giant. These are bits of Old Tongue that are still remembered, and Jon Snow is trying to learn it in the 5th book a bit so he can speak to some of the other wildlings. But the language pretty much died out, because even the Starks switched to the common tongue of the Andals. That once or twice, since like the first episode when Dany goes to Drogo, do you speak the common tongue? Well, they call it the common tongue of Westeros, but it's because it's the common tongue of the Andals. That when they invaded, like the Anglo-Saxons invading ancient Britain, they drove out all the Starks are basically like the Welsh, that they're the Celtic peoples that they pushed out to the fringes of the continent, of the island. And then the Andals came in. So everyone in Westeros in Game of Thrones, from the Lannisters to the Starks, they're technically speaking modern Andal, which is the common tongue of the Andals. Well, everyone in Long Night is speaking the old tongue of the First Men. So Peterson said, well, right off the start, Old Tongue would be universally translated as English. So what we hear as English is really Old Tongue, which is fine. That makes sense. I mean, when you see flashbacks to ancient things in the TV show, that's obviously translated for our benefit, for the Three-Eyed Raven or something. And I assumed they would do that. Like, it'd be crazy not to acknowledge that. But the problem is the Andals were going to be a prominent part of the storyline. So what he was hired to do was to develop an Andal language, even though the Andals are the guys who kind of speak English. That actually isn't as bad as it sounds. If you think about it, this is like 8,000 years ago. So they're not speaking modern Andal. They're not speaking modern Common Tongue. So he had to come up with, he's a professional linguist, he put a lot of thought into this. He came up with basically a fictionalized Old English, like archaic Andal is what they're speaking now. So they're not really speaking Common Tongue anyway, they're speaking ancient Andal. And he would have just made like an entirely separate language, but for whatever reason, the directive was it has to sound like something that could plausibly turn into English. I would have just told him to straight up use Old English, but what he did was he'd come up with fake vowels, not fake vowels, he'd come up with fake words for things that are nonsense words, like the glurkin is flinking. He said, I kept a lot of the prefixes and the suffixes and the prepositions, like an, of, on, verbed, verbing, but the middle of the word is gibberish. Like smurf. Okay, smurf. He was smurfing until he smurfed. And you put in made-up words in there that kind of fit what the books established as the Andal phonemes and sounds. But the clever thing he did that made it actually sound like a foreign language was he sort of did the, if you know your history, the Great English vowel shift that happened right before Shakespeare's time, where the Middle English of Chaucer turned into relatively modern English through this vowel shift. So like moose turned into mice. They're vowels that existed in Old English that don't exist in English anymore. So he applied this vowel shift using rules of linguistic progression in reverse to make this fictionalized alternate Old English, but not quite. And he gave like an example of, well, like you think about, like, instead of, it would sound silly if they just said he smurfed him until he smurfed. But if it's like a vowel that doesn't exist anymore, like he smurfed until he smurfed, it sounds like someone's saying it in reconstructed Old English, but it's not. And it was actually really clever that he worked out this whole thing. And this is actually, he explained it was similar to something he did on the Warcraft movie, where it's not quite English, it's off from English, but it sounds like it could turn into English. And the way he described it actually made a lot of sense. It was interesting, so please listen to his whole thing. The interview is like 40 minutes long, but he really only starts talking about this 20 minutes in. And for the rest of the second 20 minutes of the whole thing. And it makes sense. It's supposed to sound like English, but not quite. That, do you speak Frisian? No, I don't know anyone who does. Frisian is like the local dialect in the Netherlands. It's part of the same language family as English, Dutch, and German, but it's the local dialect that the Anglo-Saxons were speaking around the coasts, which still survives as a regional dialect here or there. That I don't think Dutch people can understand Frisian, or I don't think Germans can understand Frisian. So if someone told you, oh, this is Old English, and it was actually Frisian, given that I don't speak either language, how would I know the difference? So it sounds like plausible old ancient Andal. What I mean is, like, take this German joke. When ist das Nunstück Git und Slaughtermeyer? Ja, wer Hund des Oder, die Flipperwald Disput. Now, that isn't actually German. That is gibberish. That's from a Monty Python joke, where they make the world's funniest joke and translate it into German so we never hear it in English. But, like, it's to an English speaker who doesn't know German, those sound like the vowel sounds of German to the untrained ear. And I've heard, like, when German people hear that joke, they say it sounds kind of like Dutch to us. That it's supposed to sound similar enough, with enough of the same phonemes, but not quite. Whatever. So he had to make an Andal language because they were appearing prominently enough. And this is the one story point he actually knew, was he said they were supposed to be the lyrics to a wedding song. And the actual lyrics themselves were generic, just well wishes at a wedding, but the thing he confirmed is that the unaired Blood Moon pilot, a major part of it was this big wedding scene that would set the whole plot in motion. Come to think of it, I guess that's sort of like how Dany's marriage to Drogo set the whole plot in motion on Game of Thrones, like that, of that scale. And when asked to describe, well, how much can you say of the plot of why was this wedding happening, and one of the people in it was an Andal because someone was singing in Andal, just in the background, he said, as best he could remember, because again, he didn't get the whole script, somebody was getting married to somebody else, and that made somebody mad. And he goes on, someone was getting married to an Andalosi woman, and that was going to start turmoil, set in motion that turmoil was going to happen. But the turmoil itself didn't start in that pilot episode. It was threatened. It was going to build throughout the season. So, thinking on that, I used to dismiss out of hand, and I'm not too certain on it, that some people kept going, wouldn't it be cool if Lan the Clever in this show is really gender swapped to be a woman played by Naomi Watts? Which, why are you changing stuff just for the sake of changing it? And yes, it's like as distant from us as like Noah and the Ark would be. It's 8,000 years ago. And you want to play around with a little that, history got distorted. But you'd run into so many accusations from people going, oh, you're just trying to be politically correct. It's why are you doing this to the story when one of the few fragments of story we actually had about the Long Night were the stories about Lan the Clever? They're one of the few things Martin even wrote. And even then, he gave like 5 alternate versions of, well, some people say Lan was this, some people say he snuck in and killed everyone, others say he was just this Bronn-like mercenary who married a younger daughter and then, through court intrigue, worked his way up the line of succession. That would be interesting. But that people wouldn't remember that it was some important Andal princess or something, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Naomi Watts wasn't Lan. Maybe she was like Lan's mother, or just someone he worked for, and he was like a guard in her service. Because a lot of people also thought, well, John Sim is in this, he plays a lot of trickster characters, maybe he's really Lan the Clever. I'm not really sure. I'm pretty sure now that she was playing an Andal. Which one was it necessarily Lan the Clever? Hard to say. Because when you look at the one photo we have of her in costume, that she's wearing a really ornate costume. This isn't just the stuff the Starks wear around Winterfell, or the Lannisters wear around sitting in their chambers or a broth or whatever. Like, she looks like she's wearing what could be a wedding dress. And, people pointed out her character is blonde when infamously the first men are rarely blonde and the Andals are famous for being blonde. So I'm reasonably certain at this point that it was one of the Casterlys was marrying an Andal princess, Naomi Watts. But whether she was Lan the Clever, or he was like her son, or like a knight in her service that later usurped her and her husband, there are a couple of possibilities. But given the photos of her stuff seem to look Andal, seem to look foreign to Westeros, they look all Mediterranean, and that the location looks like Casterly Rock with all these coastal cliffs. I think that's what was going on. And this doesn't tell us a lot about the pilot, it's just a little bit more of the picture of what was going on. I'm sorry, I'm racing this whole thing off without a script. I just took a few notes from his thing. I want you to watch. His whole thing was actually really interesting, explaining the vowel shift. The other issue is he confirmed that the Children of the Forest were going to be very prominent in Season 1, which I guess does raise the question, which primary cast members are playing Children of the Forest? Because I have this whole other video on my channel, I will link to it, where I explain I heard these unconfirmed rumors that their last-minute fix for racial diversity in the show was, oh, let's just cast black people as Children of the Forest. Like, they really didn't put effort into it. And I don't have confirmation on that, and don't harass Peterson about this. He explained he wouldn't know. All he knows is the song lyrics they sent to him. He didn't know who anyone was playing or who was cast. He wasn't in a position to know. He explained that pretty clearly. Like, guys, I'm the linguist. They just sent me some script fragments. But, okay, the Children of the Forest are going to be in Season 1 enough that they made you create their language for it or round it out more. So who is playing them? That through all the discussion of the cast members, no one thought, well, who's going to be playing the Children of the Forest? And we heard there were race problems with that, but who knows? Just a few more supporting evidence that they were in Season 1. This is interesting because I like how Peterson has said, my priorities are to George R.R. Martin first and the TV shows second, because he's helping him come up with language things for like other place names and things. He did say Martin consulted on every TV show, including this, which brings up the Children of the Forest language, that he said in other interviews before this, oh yeah, I made up a language for them in Season 6 of the main TV show, but then they decided not to use it. So I already made it, so for Long Night I was rounding it out a little, but it already existed. And he said Martin collaborated on at least part of it, stressing, well, what will their name be? What should it sound like? And some people have said the Children of the Forest language should be unpronounceable to humans, but I think there has to be a way humans could plausibly speak it. So, whatever the case, he actually explained what the name of the Children of the Forest is in their own language. And the name of their language. That we know from the books, they said, we call ourselves those who sing the song of the earth, the singers of the earth, or just the singers. They didn't give it in their language. And he came up with a couple of variants on this. Some they said were too hard to pronounce, so he consulted with Martin. He stated that to come up with, okay, officially this is the name of their language and their name for themselves. And he can trill his R's really well as a linguist. I can't. So I'm going to spell it. And the interviewer did ask him, can you spell that? And he said, yeah. So the language of the Children of the Forest and their name for themselves is Gernamora. Gernamohra. That's their name for themselves. And their language is just you drop the A off the end. So it's Gernamor. And he says, so they're the Gernamora, which means singers of the earth. And you can call them just the Mora, which is singers for short. And this may well be book canon, because he worked it out with Martin independently of the TV producers. So we'll see where that goes in terms of other stuff, but that's interesting to know. But according to him, the primary groups in this show were the First Men, the Children of the Forest, and the Andals. And for so many people for like 2 years now, blindly insisting, it's going to have the Summer Isles in it. It's going to have Yeti in it. Well, what didn't Peterson say? He didn't say, I was sitting around making up a Summer Isles language or a Yeti language. The only languages he was working on were Andal and Children of the Forest and First Men was defaulted as English. That's it. So when people go, oh no, this would go all over the world. I got the impression from him that this was what we thought, that it was just set in Westeros, and people might visit from Andalos because it's just across the Narrow Sea, but this was not the world-spanning thing people projected their wishes onto. So that's what we have with this. I implore you, watch his whole interview. It was actually really interesting. He knows his stuff. And for those of you who speak non-English languages, I'm curious, like, how would German handle this? That, well, they have to speak, in English. I'm hearing, if I had a TV show set in France where the French is represented as English, how do you represent English speakers? Well, if it's like in medieval times, Chaucer's time, you might have them speak Middle English to distinguish them. What if this was ever dubbed into German, and all the first men like the Starks and Casterlys are speaking German, modern German? How would you represent the ancestors of modern German people? Would you have them speaking Plattdeutsch from the north or something, where it sounds kind of like this, but not quite, or archaic Proto-Germanic? I'm not sure. I'm not a trained linguist on that, but how do you represent characters speaking an ancient version of your own language when they're not dubbed into it? I don't know. One other, the big point, of course, I made a separate video on, is that Peterson confirmed very clearly and restated when the interviewer asked him, are you clear on that? Yes, the old Valyria prequel is real, which we know is Empire of Ash, and made the whole leak about it, but the old Valyria prequel leak, that was real. That was the third prequel. Actually, he said, old Valyria was the first prequel he was working on, which lines up with what I was told, that Valyria was one of the first prequel ideas, which got usurped by Richard Plepler, and the HBO head said, no, we need something in the Long Night. We need something with White Walkers to cash in on White Walker hype. So they rejected it out of hand, that it doesn't have people named Stark as prominent characters, which would have been a retread. Well, no surprise here, guys. He did say, in his words, the project is dead as far as I know. That we knew that when they picked Long Night, the other prequels went on hold. And my whole point is, it's interesting as book notes that everyone worked with Martin on this, and while Empire of Ash or the Valyria prequel might be dead or on hold now, he said, I'm the linguist, I'm one of the last people to know about the internal negotiations at HBO, that there is reason to hope that things are changing. Like, up to 2 months ago, everyone thought, well, it's dead because they're making Long Night. Now, Long Night is canceled, and on top of that, the men who picked it don't work at HBO anymore. Plepler is gone. AT&T cleaned house and brought in all sorts of new people to pick other shows. And Martin himself has been saying, they're kind of thinking of maybe doing a second show at the same time to compete with all the other streamers. So yes, the project is, the way he said it was, it died before it hit the casting phase, which, that I was told it was on hold before they ever got to casting, but it was developed enough that it had a full series Bible, a season 1 200-page outline, and they had hired Peterson to start making languages for it. That he said, I was hired to start working on it, but then I never got to, because by then they put it on hold. So he didn't start working on, like, maybe the Sphinxes speak archaic Valyrian, which he developed independently, but whatever. So it's confirmation. The pitch exists, and it is a very developed pitch, to the point it has a season outline in it and a story Bible. And he also confirmed a bit of what were, all 5 pitches. Well, there was Long Night, there was House of the Dragon, which is apparently Dance of the Dragons, the one Cogman was doing, which is now run by Ryan Condal, and the third one was Valyria. And he said even he didn't know what the 4th and 5th ones were, though he isn't that close to production. He said no one I worked with had ever even heard a hint of what the 4th and 5th ones were. Not just that I didn't know, people I work with didn't know, or weren't collaborating on that. So that lines up with what I heard, that the 4th and 5th pitches never went to the series Bible phase. They were just pitches, like a 100-page, a pitch that you write and give to the HBO executives to sell them on it without any world building or anything. So I don't think the fourth and fifth ones had series Bibles, and you said it's a mystery, and probably because they didn't get that very far in development. So if the fourth and fifth ideas were not ready, you see my point here, that if you want to make a second one to coincide with House of the Dragon, the Valyria one is the only one that's well developed enough to do that reasonably quickly, and to have something worth telling, versus the other ideas didn't even get very far. And I can reasonably guess that the fourth one was probably Targaryen conquest through the Faith Militant Uprising, which we thought for a while, purely because when Fire and Blood came out, Martin said two prequel pitches are based on it. Which, people going, oh, House of the Dragon must be an anthology from start to finish. No, if they said it's leading up to the Dance of the Dragons, that means it's like starting with Rogue Prince or something, but that it's the second half of Fire and Blood on the dance. That the fourth pitch must have been Targaryen conquest, given Martin said the two ideas were from that book. The fifth one, I have no idea, and the pitch probably didn't get very far anyway. And I'm just curious, what the heck was the fifth pitch? I thought for a while it might be like a one-shot, one-season young Tywin show, which when you read his chapters in the World of Ice and Fire, you go, this could be a miniseries. Now, Martin did say, we never pitched Robert's Rebellion, we never pitched Dunk and Egg, and he also said that he didn't pitch Aegon the Fourth, which leads me to think they wouldn't pitch a Blackfire Rebellion without Aegon the Fourth, particularly because they never mentioned the name Blackfire in live action. So, I think that'd be a good prequel, just not right away, that you need to set up who the Blackfires were. So, it might have been a Blackfire Rebellion without Aegon IV, which Martin said that Aegon IV wasn't in it, so I don't think that's likely. It might have been young Tywin, or, maybe it was like Nymeria and the Thousand Ships of the Rhoynar, but that overlaps with old Valyria too much. I don't think, because they said there'll be flashbacks in the Valyria prequel to historical events, so we might see that in flashback, and that would make a good TV show. A lot of people said that's the one narrative we'd really like to see, but it might have been young Tywin or something. That I have no idea what the fifth pitch was. But even he said the fourth and fifth pitches did not get very far. They were they were in the running for such a little time that no one I ever spoke to even knew what they were. That the three real contenders were Dance of the Dragons, Long Night, and Valyria. So, people are, oh, he's confirming that Valyria was canceled. It was canceled 2 months ago when Long Night was the only prequel. Things are in flux now, and if they want to have a second prequel, I think that could be it. But watch his whole interview. It just gives us our first clues of, well, what was the Long Night prequel like? Well, there were children in the forest in season 1. It would involve someone marrying an Andal princess, leading to conflict, and just, well, wait a minute. Who is Naomi Watts playing? I think she was a person being married, not necessarily Land the Clever. Maybe he was someone who worked for her. Hard to say. But I'm going to keep track of just research. I know it's a dead project, but it's just what the heck were they trying to do? Picking apart the mystery of this is fun. So I'll keep you updated with other prequel news as we hear it with House of the Dragon as it goes forward. And if you haven't checked out the Empire of Ash League stuff, please check that out now on my channel.